18 seconds. That is the total duration from the first glint of sunlight off a rifle scope to the moment of decisive action that separated a $5 million asset from total loss. It was the window in which a man, encased in 11 tons of steel and polycarbonate, had to choose between procedure and survival. In this business, we have a saying: the vehicle is your weapon, your shield, and your coffin. In those 18 seconds, one man had to decide which of the three it would be. This is not a story of heroism in the conventional sense. It is a clinical dissection of a decision, an analysis of the moment where years of training and a lifetime of experience were compressed into a singular, violent, and ultimately correct choice against a meticulously planned ambush, executed by a cartel kill squad. To understand the event, you must first understand the context of the operation. It was a sweep run, a routine but high-risk procedure common in the cash-in-transit industry. The objective was the consolidated collection of currency from multiple major banking institutions within a dense urban corridor for transport to a central processing facility. The total value of the cargo on this particular morning was just over $5 million in used, unmarked bills. The very nature of a sweep run creates a vulnerability: predictability. The route, while varied daily within a narrow set of parameters, adheres to a logistical logic that an intelligent adversary can map. Over time, patterns emerge. Collection points, timing windows, and probable transit vectors become predictable data points. This predictability is the operational cancer of our industry. The vehicle itself was a purpose-built, non-standard armoured truck, manufactured by a specialised security vehicle company known for its robust designs. It was not a modified commercial chassis, but a bespoke monocoque hull built from the ground up. The armour rating was certified at a B6 level, meaning it was designed to withstand multiple impacts from rifle calibers up to and including 7.62 by 51mm NATO rounds. The glass was a multi-layered laminate of polycarbonate and leaded glass, approximately 42mm thick. Crucially, this glass was not designed for indefinite resistance. Each impact degrades its structural integrity, creating microfractures and a phenomenon known as spalling, where fragments from the interior surface can break away at high velocity, becoming secondary projectiles within the cabin. The vehicle weighed approximately 22,000 pounds, powered by a high-torque diesel engine, and was equipped with run-flat tyres designed to function for at least 30 miles at reduced speed after being punctured. It was, in essence, a mobile vault. But every vault has a weak point, and every shield has its limits. The crew consisted of 3 individuals. In the rear compartment, a cargo guard whose sole responsibility was the sanctity of the asset. In the front passenger seat, a communications officer and observer, armed with a standard service pistol and responsible for coordinating with the central dispatch. And in the driver's seat, the protagonist of this analysis. He was a 48-year-old man with 22 years of experience in the high-risk security sector, 10 of them specifically in cash-in-transit operations. His background included prior military service in a reconnaissance unit, followed by a long tenure in private executive protection. He was not just a driver, he was a security specialist whose primary function was the operation of the vehicle as a defensive and offensive tool. His training record was extensive, with thousands of hours logged in advanced evasive driving, anti-ambush drills, and vehicle-based combat scenarios. His psychological profile indicated an extremely low resting heart rate, high levels of emotional regulation under stress, and a predisposition for analytical rather than reactive decision-making. He was, by every metric, a seasoned professional. However, the most sophisticated vehicle and the most experienced crew are rendered vulnerable by a single, catastrophic point of failure. In this case, it was not a mechanical or human error within the truck itself. The vulnerability was systemic. A subsequent internal investigation conducted with the highest level of corporate and federal oversight concluded with high confidence that the operational data for this specific run, the route, the timing, the vehicle identification, and the asset value, had been compromised. This was not a random act of violence. It was a targeted assassination of a specific asset, made possible by a critical intelligence failure within the security firm's own operational planning division. Someone with high-level access had leaked the data. The crew was driving a state-of-the-art armoured vehicle, but they were doing so on a map drawn by their enemy. The chosen location for the ambush was tactically perfect. It was a four-lane road in a semi-industrial district, flanked on one side by a high windowless concrete wall of a warehouse complex, and on the other by a steep wooded embankment dropping down to a railway line. It was a natural choke point. Approximately 300 metres past a gentle curve, the road straightened, offering a clear line of sight for over half a mile. There were no side streets, no turn-offs, no viable escape routes for at least a kilometre. The attackers had effectively created a linear kill zone. By placing their primary blockade at the far end of this straight section, they ensured their target would be fully committed to the channel with its speed stabilised before the trap was sprung. Response time for local law enforcement, even under the most optimistic projections, was estimated at 3 to 4 minutes, an eternity in a firefight. The antagonists were not common criminals. Analysis of the tactics, equipment, and execution points to a highly professional and disciplined force, likely composed of former military special operations personnel, now in the employ of a major transnational trafficking organization. The cartel had diversified its portfolio, moving into high-yield, high-complexity crimes like cash-in-transit heists as a logical extension of their logistical and paramilitary capabilities. They deployed a team of at least 8, possibly 10, individuals. They were equipped with 7.62 by 39mm caliber automatic rifles, standard issue in many former Eastern Bloc armies, and a favourite of such organisations for their ruggedness and sheer penetrative power at close to medium range. They had at least 2 vehicles, a heavy-duty pickup truck used as the primary physical blockade, and a sedan positioned further back as a pursuit and extraction vehicle. Their communications were encrypted. Their movements were coordinated. They established overlapping fields of fire covering the kill zone from multiple angles, including an elevated position on the wooded embankment. Their plan was a classic, by-the-book vehicle ambush, designed to systematically dismantle the target's defences. It relied on 3 core principles: shock, isolation, and control. Shock, through the sudden and overwhelming application of violence, was intended to psychologically paralyse the crew. Isolation was achieved by selecting a location that physically prevented escape and delayed reinforcement. Control was to be established by forcing the vehicle to a halt within the pre-selected ambush box, allowing the attackers to breach it at their leisure. They would use focused fire to degrade the ballistic glass, disable the engine block, and shred the tyres. Once the vehicle was immobilised and the crew suppressed, they would use heavy tools or small explosive charges to breach the cargo doors. It was a sound, methodical, and professional plan, and it was built upon a single, critical, and ultimately fatal assumption. The entire architecture of their ambush, every angle of fire, every man's position, every phase of the attack, was predicated on the belief that the driver of the armoured truck would follow standard operating procedure. Standard operating procedure, in this scenario, dictates that when faced with a blockade or an armed threat, the driver should stop the vehicle at a safe distance, report the situation to dispatch, and await instructions or the arrival of law enforcement. The vehicle is to be used as a static fortress, a pillbox of hardened steel from which the crew can weather the storm. This procedure is drilled into guards across the industry. It is designed to minimize risk, to de-escalate, to protect the asset by preventing a mobile confrontation that could lead to civilian casualties or the loss of the vehicle in an uncontrolled environment. It is a logical, risk-averse and defensive posture. And in this specific context, it would have been a death sentence. To stop would have been to surrender the initiative completely. It would have meant willingly placing oneself in the centre of the kill zone and handing the attackers the one thing they needed most: time. A static defence is death. The attackers knew this and they counted on it. Their intellectual arrogance, their faith in the predictability of their target's training, was the foundational flaw in their otherwise meticulous plan. At 6:47 and 15 seconds on a clear, bright morning, the armoured vehicle rounded the gentle curve and entered the straight 300-metre section of road. The driver later reported that the first thing he observed was the unnatural lack of traffic. It was a weekday morning, and this artery should have had at least moderate commercial traffic. It was empty. This was the first indicator of an anomaly, a deviation from the baseline of normalcy. His senses, honed by years of threat assessment, registered this emptiness not as a relief, but as a warning. This is the first step in the OODA loop. Observe. He observed a void where there should have been activity. His passenger, the communications guard, did not initially share this assessment. He was younger, with less than 2 years of experience. His normalcy bias, the cognitive tendency to believe that things will function the way they normally function, was still strong. He saw an empty road and perceived it as a clear path. The driver saw the same empty road and perceived it as a prepared battlefield. At 6:47 and 18 seconds, 3 seconds after entering the straightaway, the driver identified the obstacle. A dark-coloured pickup truck was parked sideways, completely blocking the 2 lanes of travel. It was approximately 250 metres distant. This was the second stage of the OODA loop, orient. He had to orient this new piece of information within the context of his environment and his mission. An accident, a breakdown, or a blockade. The lack of other vehicles, the absence of emergency lights or people milling about, immediately pointed toward the third most dangerous possibility. His training overlaid a tactical template onto the unfolding scene. Blockade plus empty road equals potential ambush. The communications guard, now seeing the blockade, reacted as he was trained. He reached for his radio handset to report the obstruction, his voice calm as he began to recite the standard procedural script. He expected the driver to begin braking, to slow the 11-ton vehicle and come to a controlled stop at a distance of 50 to 100 meters, as per the manual. This is the moment where 2 worlds diverged, the world of procedure and the world of reality. The driver did not touch the brakes. His foot remained firmly on the accelerator. He did not reach for his radio. His hands remained locked on the steering wheel at the 9 and 3 o'clock positions. He was still in the orient phase, but processing at a speed his passenger could not comprehend. He scanned the periphery, the warehouse wall, the wooded embankment. His experience told him the shooters would be there. He could not see them, but he knew they were there. He assessed his vehicle's momentum, its mass, and the structure of the blocking vehicle. He was performing a complex series of calculations under immense psychological pressure. The standard procedure to stop was a siren call to disaster. It would mean ceding all control. He had to make a decision. This was the third stage. Decide. At 6:47 and 21 seconds, the decision was made. The first shot was fired. It was a single, high-velocity round striking the ballistic glass of the windshield directly in front of the driver's face. The impact was deafening inside the cabin. A sharp, violent crack like a giant stone striking the glass. A spiderweb of fractures instantly radiated from the point of impact, but the round did not penetrate. Its purpose was not necessarily to kill, but to shock. It was the starting pistol for the ambush, a punctuation mark designed to trigger panic and force the vehicle to a halt. For the passenger, it worked. He flinched violently, dropping the radio. For the driver, it was merely confirmation. The ambush was real. The threat was lethal. His decision was correct. This was the first phase of the attack, psychological disruption. His foot did not move from the accelerator. He did not brake. He did not swerve. He held his course. This is the final stage of the OODA loop, act. While his passenger was still reacting to the first shot, the driver was already acting on a decision he had made 3 seconds earlier. He had compressed his entire observe, orient, decide, act cycle into a fraction of the time the attackers had anticipated. He was now inside their decision cycle. He was moving faster than they could react to his unconventional response. At 6:47 and 24 seconds, the second phase of the attack began. The single shot was replaced by a torrent of automatic fire. Multiple rifles from at least 3 positions, 2 from the warehouse side, 1 from the elevated position on the embankment, opened up simultaneously. The sound inside the cabin transformed from a single crack into a deafening percussive roar, like being inside a steel drum during a hailstorm of sledgehammers. Dozens of rounds hammered into the windshield, the side windows and the upper body of the truck. Each impact sent new shockwaves through the glass, expanding the web of fractures until the entire forward view was a milky, opaque constellation of shattered laminate. Visibility dropped to near zero. This was suppressive fire designed to pin the crew down, obscure their vision, and degrade the vehicle's armor. The passenger guard reported later that in this moment he believed they were going to die. He was curled down in his seat, his hands over his head, a purely instinctual response to overwhelming, inescapable violence. He was completely suppressed, tactically and psychologically irrelevant. The cargo guard in the rear, hearing the impacts but having no visual, could only brace for the inevitable and hold his position. He was a passenger on a ship in a hurricane, his fate entirely in the hands of the pilot. The driver, however, was still acting. He could no longer see clearly through the shattered windshield. He was now driving by memory and feel, aiming the massive bulk of his vehicle at a target he had locked in his mind's eye seconds before, the pickup truck. His course remained steady. The speedometer, which had been holding at around 45 miles per hour, began to climb as he depressed the accelerator further. He was not stopping. He was not slowing. He was accelerating into the heart of the kill zone. At 6:47 and 27 seconds, the third phase of the attack was supposed to commence. The assault team positioned near the blockade was meant to advance on the now stationary or slow-moving target. But the target was not stationary. It was accelerating. Instead of a static pillbox, they were faced with an 11-ton battering ram, moving at nearly 50 miles per hour. The script had been torn apart. The attackers, who had been in positions of cover, were now forced to break that cover and react to a scenario they had not planned for. Their professional discipline momentarily fractured, replaced by disbelief, then urgency. The distance closed rapidly. 200 meters, 150, 100. The concentration of fire on the truck was immense. The ballistic glass was delaminating under the sheer volume of impacts, turning a milky white. Chunks of the outer layers were being blasted away. The engine block, protected by armoured louvers, took multiple hits. 2 tyres on the driver's side were punctured, and the run-flat system engaged with a jolt. The vehicle listed slightly but maintained its forward momentum. The driver was fighting the wheel, wrestling to keep the wounded beast on its path. At 6:47 and 33 seconds, 18 seconds after the driver first spotted the empty road, the armoured truck struck the blockade. The impact was a cataclysm of sheared metal and shattered glass. The pickup truck, weighing perhaps 5,000 pounds, stood no chance against the 22,000-pound armoured vehicle moving at speed. The physics were simple and brutal. The armoured truck's hardened steel bumper, designed for exactly this purpose, struck the pickup broadside, folding it in half like a tin can. The pickup was thrown sideways and backwards with tremendous force, clearing a path through the blockade. 2 of the attackers who had been positioned too close to the blocking vehicle were struck by the pickup as it was violently displaced. The armoured truck ploughed through the wreckage, its own front end mangled, but its momentum still carrying it forward. The driver did not stop to assess the damage. He did not look back. He was focused on one thing only: exiting the kill zone. The cardinal rule of any ambush is to get out of the ambush envelope. The only way out of the kill zone is through it. He continued to accelerate, the ruined tyres flapping, the engine screaming, the view ahead a fractured mosaic. The sedan, the attacker's chase vehicle, was now blocked by the wreckage of its own primary blockade. The ambush plan had literally choked on itself. The remaining attackers fired a few last desperate rounds at the retreating truck, but their discipline was broken. Their plan had failed in its most critical phase. The target had refused to be a target. It had become a weapon. A brief, futile pursuit by the chase car was abandoned within a mile as the heavily damaged but still mobile armoured truck reached a more populated area, and the driver was finally able to make a clear report to dispatch, his voice recorded as being preternaturally calm. The total duration of the engagement, from the first shot to clearing the blockade, was less than 30 seconds. An estimated 200 rounds of 7.62mm ammunition had been fired at the vehicle. The number of rounds that penetrated the cabin was 0. The immediate aftermath was an exercise in controlled chaos. The driver, following post-engagement protocol, did not stop until he reached the pre-designated safe zone, the perimeter of a local police precinct. Only then did the engine, which had sustained critical damage, finally die. The crew disembarked. The passenger guard had sustained minor cuts from glass spalling that had penetrated his sleeve. The cargo guard in the rear was uninjured, merely shaken and bruised. The driver was completely unharmed. The asset, the $5 million in the rear compartment, was completely secure. The vehicle, however, was functionally destroyed. It was a testament to the violence it had absorbed. Every single pane of ballistic glass was shattered and opaque, a condition known as a total whiteout. The front bumper and grille were gone, crushed inward from the impact. The hood was peeled back, and the engine block itself had sustained multiple direct hits, one of which had cracked the manifold, causing the eventual failure. Both tyres on the left side were shredded down to the rims, the run-flat inserts having done their job before disintegrating. The body panels on all sides were pocked with hundreds of impact marks, the paint stripped away to the bare metal. It looked less like a truck and more like a historical artifact from a war zone. It had served as a shield, and it had performed its duty perfectly, but its service life was over. It had bought them the time they needed. The outcome for the antagonists was decidedly less successful. Law enforcement, responding to the driver's eventual call and the reports of heavy gunfire, arrived at the scene of the ambush to find a scene of carnage and abandonment. The wrecked pickup truck was still smouldering. They recovered the bodies of 2 attackers, one killed by blunt force trauma from the impact, the other having sustained fatal injuries and been left behind by his comrades. Blood trails indicated at least one other attacker was seriously wounded. The abandoned equipment, magazines, communication devices, and one rifle provided a wealth of forensic intelligence that would later contribute to the dismantling of a significant portion of the cartel's regional operations. Their return on investment for an operation that required months of planning, significant financial outlay, and the compromise of a high-level source was zero. They had lost personnel, equipment, and anonymity. All for nothing. In the final analysis, we must synthesize the lessons of this event. It is a perfect case study in the complex interplay between technology, procedure, and human factors. The technology, the B6 level armor, performed its function flawlessly. It absorbed a level of punishment that would have shredded any lesser vehicle, and it kept the crew alive. This validates the significant investment in high-quality protective equipment. However, to say the armor saved them is an incomplete and dangerous conclusion. The armor only bought them time. It was a shield, but a shield is useless without a soldier who knows how to use it. Simultaneously, the event represents a catastrophic failure of institutional security. The fact that the attackers knew the route, the time, and the target demonstrates a breach at a fundamental level. All the armor in the world is a poor substitute for compromised intelligence. The security of the data is paramount, for it is the foundation upon which all physical security is built. The greatest vulnerability of this mission was not on a road, but on a server or in a conversation somewhere within the company's own walls. This failure put the crew in an impossible situation and should have resulted in their deaths. The central decisive element was the human factor, specifically the driver. His actions stand as a stark refutation of rigid, compliance-based procedures in the face of an adaptive, intelligent adversary. Let us revisit the attackers' primary mistake. They planned for compliance. They built their ambush box around the predictable, procedural response of a standard security driver. Their plan was not merely to destroy a truck, it was to manipulate a person. They were counting on the driver's training to force him into a fatal error. Stopping. Their plan was brilliant but brittle. It lacked redundancy because it failed to account for one variable: human willpower. It failed to account for a professional who could see the playbook, understand it, and choose to rip the page out. The driver did not simply react. He dominated the decision-making process. By getting inside the attacker's OODA loop, he seized control of the engagement's tempo. They were forced to react to him, not the other way around. This is a critical concept. In any conflict, the party that is consistently reacting to the other is the party that is losing. His decision to accelerate into the gunfire to ram the blockade was a violent and aggressive act that violated every instinct for self-preservation. A lesser man would have braked. A lesser man conditioned by procedure over reality would have stopped. And a lesser man would have died, waiting for a rescue that would never have arrived in time. From this incident, we can distill several key lessons that must be integrated into our doctrine. First, intelligent security is the foundation of all physical security. An operation is compromised long before the first shot is fired. We must treat our data with the same level of paranoid diligence with which we treat our assets, recognizing that a leaked email can be more deadly than a bullet. Second, static defense is death. In an ambush scenario against a professional force, the moment a vehicle stops, it transforms from a mobile asset into a coffin. Our training must evolve. While procedural compliance has its place, we must empower our operators with the training and the authority to make dynamic, aggressive, and unconventional decisions when the tactical situation demands it. We must train for the exception, not just the rule. The vehicle must be seen not just as a shield, but as a weapon of opportunity. Third, equipment buys time, but training determines outcomes. The B6 armor gave the driver a window of about 30 seconds. That is all. Another driver in the same truck facing the same threat might have used those 30 seconds to make a frantic radio call before being overwhelmed. It was the driver's ability to use that window of time, a window paid for in steel and polycarbonate, to execute a trained, decisive maneuver that led to survival. The technology was a necessary but not sufficient condition for success. Fourth, and finally, we must evolve our methodology to match the sophistication of the threat. We are no longer facing smash-and-grab criminals with pistols. We are facing paramilitary organizations with sophisticated intelligence-gathering capabilities, military-grade hardware, and special operations training. We cannot counter a 21st century threat with 20th century procedures. Our response must be as adaptive, intelligent, and ruthless as theirs. We must assume they have a plan, and we must train our people to be the one variable that plan cannot account for. The driver was not a hero in a cinematic sense. He was a professional executing his craft at the highest level. His actions were not born of bravery in the heat of the moment, but of countless hours of repetitive, boring, grueling training. The moment of crisis does not create character. It reveals it. In that critical 18-second window, what was revealed was a man whose training had become so ingrained that it superseded his instinct for panic. He had crossed what we in the training community call the mental bridge. The mental bridge is the psychological crossing point where learned knowledge becomes instinctual action. It is the point where you no longer have to think about the right thing to do, you simply do it. It is built through thousands of repetitions, through stress inoculation, through scenario-based training that is so realistic it feels like the real thing. The driver did not have to think. Standard procedure says stop, but my training says go. He simply went. He had crossed that bridge long ago in a training facility on a closed course. On that morning, he just walked across it one more time. The ultimate lesson is this. The $5 million was saved not by 42 millimeters of ballistic glass, but by the will of the man sitting behind it. The technology was the shield, the procedure was the trap, but the man was the weapon. The fight goes to those who understand that the only way out of the kill zone is through it. End of debrief.